But this to me, see, in this sense, sentiment and these and desire are they're much harder to doubt than thinking, than models, than cognition, I think.
So you're starting to sound like a bit of a sentimentalist, man. You
Very
know,
much
somebody
so.
that's like, yeah, like a member of Rousseau's camp of romanticism. This notion that emotion is what drives us. That all we are is just like a tempest of sadness, happiness, and everything in between. Is that what you think?
A little bit. I think that I like what Charles Fourier wrote when he imagined that sort of the universe operated on laws of passionate attraction, as he called it, and that basically desire was the most important thing to look at when we're talking about human beings. I think that's correct.
Wow. What's his name?
Charles Fourier. He's credited by many with inventing socialism, although he didn't use that word. I like his description of it much better than what some of the other later socialists came up with.
What is, if you don't mind me asking, if you'd oblige me, what is his description of socialism?
Well, rather he called it harmony, and he basically he believed so rather than ranting about capitalism endlessly, he thought that civilization itself was sick. He thought that
Okay.
it was obvious that we had built a civilization completely contrary to the natural desires of people, and because of this, because we were so confused about our desires, we could not help but make ridiculous errors over and over and over again. And he thought that by reorganizing society around people's true passions, you could build a better world based entirely around voluntary attraction and people's desires, and that this would create a society of fantastic wealth, and it would function. You would need no kind of revolution or military conquest to make this occur. You could just attract people to it.
All right. Wow. That honestly, like that description, it brought tears to my eyes. I'm
Me
not
too.
kidding. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. It literally brought tears to my eyes. And
How is
thank you
that
for giving me
socialism?
that. Thank you for giving me that snippet of wisdom. I appreciate that.
Check him out. He was quite a fabulous, quite an eccentric person, but I think he was onto something, and I think that later social theorists sort of did us a big disservice by throwing him under the bus. He was accused of being a utopianist, and maybe he was, but I think he had some interesting things to say.
Well,
How does that tie to socialism?
well, I mean, maybe you just joined the conversation, I think. But if you were listening, the reason why it ties to socialism is because socialism is considered, from the Marxist-Leninist perspective, like a sort of like a stepping stone towards the final stage of human civilization, which is like non-hierarchical, where nobody's like a slave to anybody, right? So that directly ties that it's describing a state of harmony, a state of utopia, which is essentially the final stage of human civilization, basically.
No. So Fourier got rather more detailed than that. Oh my gosh,
Sorry.
he talked about kind of different concentric series. He mapped out a whole sense of so what he thought was going to come next would be this just the next phase of civilization, right? We've been through phases, and it wouldn't like end with harmony. That was just the next order, and this was one of like 18 different phases civilization would go through before finally ending. And but certainly, yeah, it was.
Go into this. What is it? Get into the eschatology. So what happens next?
Well, so he thought that whenever he used the term civilization, he meant it as a pejorative. So he thought that there was kind of a barbarian phase of humanity, and then it went into the civilized quote unquote phase. But he thought civilization was primarily characterized by kind of wanton confusion and madness, and that pretty much everything about it was terrible. But as we got out of that, we would go through a phase of just sort of incremental, building of pleasures and interests and so I'm not versed exactly on the precise forms these were supposed to have taken, but he wasn't really a precise guy. He said right at the beginning, like, look, everything I say is 7/8 true, and you can find the 1/8 exception to it. It doesn't mean you've defeated my idea, right? And so yeah, basically he just thought it was going to be much nicer than what it was today. But note though that he was not at all what could be considered Marxist.
Marxist-Leninist. He
He
was not a Marxist. Yeah, no,
he
I
was very
know.
much not
Yeah,
a
he was different.
yeah. He liked hierarchy.
He didn't
He
call
thought it
himself a
was okay.
socialist. Right.
Right.
Okay. Here's the thing, right? Like, there's a difference between naturally imposed hierarchies that exist outside the realm of your control. No matter how hard you work out, no matter how much you lift, you're never going to be as physically attractive as some people. That is the natural hierarchy of things. But now there's a difference between that and artificially imposed hierarchies.
Yes, I agree.
Caused by civilization.
Yes, however, by the same token, could we not say whatever the opposite of hierarchy is, let's say community, right? Like you could also have presumably you could have twisted artificial versions of this.
But here's where I think he's talking about how civilization warps our thinking and makes us confused because of the artificially imposed hierarchies that it forces us to operate.
Well, rather what he would say, the confusion, like hierarchy would just be one of many things we could be confused about, right? Like he thought we were confused about almost everything, and so that would certainly be one of them. But it was confusion of our desires. So one of our desires is hierarchy, right? As he put it, competition for status and wealth. People love this; they enjoy it. But what he really had a problem with was unnecessary poverty, unnecessary destitution, and the ignoring of people's wants and feelings. He thought that was what was sort of twisted and messed up. And he thought that basically the variety of people's wants were such that they could be harmonized, right? That as long as they were operating in a kind of harmonious way and interacting with each other freely, you would get a kind of natural, everything that we wanted done could get done. Like he thought that you didn't really need, like he wanted to organize society around voluntary work. So rather than kind of obsessing over kind of what was market efficient and all that, like you just find what people liked and were good at, and then you just encourage them to do that, and there you go. Like it would solve itself, because out of 800 people, well, chances are you're going to have, the artist, the pottery maker, the gardener, it will work out. And it was the fact that we'd sort of isolated ourselves and divided ourselves up, like that was really part of the problem.
Right. No, I get that. I'm gonna have to read more about this guy because he's just fascinating to me, man. He really is. Because
nice.
He seems like a dreamer.
He certainly was. He also had some crazy ideas.
I'm not saying that pejoratively.
He thought that there was going to be a new aurora borealis that would appear above the North Pole, and that it would desalinate the oceans, and that this would help usher in this era of prosperity. He was a really interesting fellow, but he was writing in 1808. Science was not quite exactly what it was then as it is today.
Yeah, so it would be unfair for us to try to, critique him.
Oh, well, we can, but yeah.
That's fascinating, man. Thank you for telling me about this guy. He definitely does the predecessors to the later socialists.
Oh, well, and here's the thing: they call him out by name. If you read Marx and Engels, they go, "Yeah, Charles Fourier, nice guy, but he was a bourgeois fabulist, and really, what we ought to do is, organize armed workers' revolution against the capitalists." And they sort of threw him under the bus by name. He had a whole school of followers.
Man,
there was a whole series of of early French utopianists, that the Marxists decried.
And he was like a leader.
Basically. He was like a merchant. Nobody had heard, silk merchant. Nobody ever heard of him. And yeah, he started publishing these crazy letters, and he became a bit of a sensation. And there were a couple people that tried to, like the Fourierists. They tried to start what did he call them? Their own little phalansteries, their little cities or towns, communities. But nothing. I don't think anything really worked out. Yeah, basically.
Yeah, it's a shame, man. I was reading about the communes in Paris, the Paris Commune.
Yeah.
And basically how you had the anarchists and the communists, and that infighting is what caused them to essentially implode.
Yes, this is a common story. And maybe if I were to apply a bit of a Fourierist lens there, what he would say, well, he talked a lot about prejudices, and he thought that like it was the prejudices that people were embroiled in that kept them from just sort of embracing the obvious. And what you might see if you try to start a community, right? But you don't have the right variety of people, of passionate people there. There you exclude people, right? You have these prejudices, right? So you're not going to let in to the group that which you need to keep the group healthy. And it's these prejudices that keep people from just noting the obvious, noting that you need a nice variety of folks. And that's probably what comes to mind when I think about all of these examples in history where kind of communal movements and leftist projects sort of collapse because they might be missing some important ingredients, you know, that they're excluding from the mix.
I mean, and what do you think those important ingredients are, though, if you don't mind?
Well, I would say, so again, taking him at face value here about that it's the prejudices that are the problem, I ask always, like, well, what are we prejudiced about? You know, and I would say that whoever the enemy is, right, that's probably who you're missing. So I think looking from the kind of Marxist communists and their perspective, I think it's pretty obvious, right? The business people, the market people, the buyers and sellers, the merchants, those types of folks who are kind of often lumped in with the enemy, the capitalists, etc. They probably are exactly the ones that you need to be a part of this project. And I think that's probably one large area, you know. Fourier thought that there was no reason why, say, traditionalists, right, people who had more conservative attitude to certain social relations, and experimenters and weird people, right, there's no reason why they could not be in the same community, you know. It was only prejudice keeping them apart, and I think that's a big problem with these types of experimental communes. They tend to lack the more grounded, competitive types that can keep things moving. But those people also lack, right? They lack the dreamers, you know, the artists, the people that want to see these new and unusual things.
Yeah.